Okay, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone who is joining us, depending on where you are. Welcome to the fourth online Cambridge Ukrainian Studies conversation of this Easter term 2020. My name is Olenka Pevny, and I am a university lecturer in Slavonic Studies at the Faculty of Modern and Medieval Languages and Linguistics, and the director of Cambridge Ukrainian Studies. As some of you already know, those of you who've joined us before, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've decided to substitute our on-campus Ukrainian studies events with a series of online conversations that have been organized by Andrii Smytsniuk, the language teaching officer at the University of Cambridge. And while we really miss welcoming guests and audiences to Cambridge, the online conversations have given us a chance to broaden our reach, not just in terms of viewers, but on the number of events we've been able to host. So again, and I say this each time, we really genuinely appreciate your interest and support of our program, and we invite you to follow us on Cambridge Ukrainian Studies Facebook, on our Facebook page. So our three previous online conversations have focused on economics, politics, and educational policies in Ukraine. And today we touch upon the topic of culture. So unfortunately, because of the current budgetary reforms in Ukraine, there have been significant cuts of funding to leading cultural institutions, and that this has threatened their, the continuity of their work and even their livelihood. So these ominous developments tug at our heartstrings, but also really make us see red, as it really is the language, culture, and history of Ukraine that lie at the core of the Cambridge Ukrainian Studies program. So our students, many of whom are listening today, or should be listening today, are eager to continue their studies in Ukraine itself. And they've expressed great interest in taking up internships at such cultural institutions as the Mystets'kyi Arsenal, which translates into Art Arsenal. And the Arsenal plays a key role in Ukraine's cultural scene, and it's a really prominent complex located in a very spacious historical military structure in the center of Kyiv. Today, we are honored to be able to speak about cultural politics and the role of cultural institutions in Ukraine's international relations with Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta, the General Director of the Mystets'kyi Arsenal Art and Culture Museum Complex, and the former First Deputy Minister of Culture of Ukraine. So I'm going to go on a limb here, and I hope that I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta advocates the importance of culture in the economic and social well-being of communities, and upholds the notion that culture provides a greater worth than the money used to support it. So today's conversation will take the format of a 30-minute interview conducted by Andrii Smytsniuk with Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta, and this will be followed by a open question and answer period in which I will take questions from viewers. So please submit your questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom, and please join me, even if virtually, to welcome our speaker, Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta, and I hope you all enjoy this talk, and I look forward to looking and reading your questions to Olesya. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to our speaker and to Andrii Smytsniuk.
Thank you, Olenka, for introduction, and Pani Olesya, it's a pleasure having you here. I would like to start with introducing a short video for our audience that I just received from Pani Olesya, just to show how Mystets'kyi Arsenal looks like. It's a very short video, and by now to see my screen? Wonderful. So
there. As you see, it's a really large building, historical building of 18th century, built in one of the most prominent areas of Kyiv, next to Kyiv-Peczerska-Lavra, which is a very important historical site. And our building was constructed as a part of Kyiv fortress. And ironically, one of the first landmarks of Russian imperial forces. And it was used as a weaponry arsenal until 2005, more or less, and it belonged to the Ministry of Military Affairs. It only became a cultural site after that. There was an initiative of then President Viktor Yushchenko, who saw it as a major museum. However, at the moment, Art Arsenal and the way it functions de facto is a type of interdisciplinary art center. So we combine different programs, which includes museum component, literature, contemporary art, also music and theater. But we are centered as an institution around our main building, which you have just seen, and it's a national monument. As I said, it was a part of Kyiv fortress. That's why our name is Arsenal. Well, however, today it's one of the largest Ukrainian cultural institutions, and our mission as a cultural institution is to serve as a place and means of growth for citizens. However abstract that sounds, by that I mean intellectual growth and development of imagination, understanding of culture, and if you like, human condition today. Also understanding of democratic interaction and democratic life more generally. In a way, it's close to a mission of a university, which has impact of our program on our programming. I understand that you already had Sergei Kvit as one of the speakers. So my words might resemble what he has already, what he said previously. Since we put so much emphasis on growth and intellectual development, that places us closer to establishments, but of course we are a cultural institution, and what we basically do, we do three major things. We interpret our collection and the building. The building you've just seen, our collection consists of three parts. Ukrainian avant-garde of the first half of the 20th century, contemporary art, which we commissioned, and archaeology, based on what was excavated in our area. The second thing that we do, we interpret recent history of Ukrainian culture, and since 2017, we've been focused on the 20th century in Ukraine. Why? Because it was one of the most productive periods in Ukrainian culture in recent in the past few centuries, but it was almost entirely forbidden through the Soviet time, due to Soviet policies. And another period, which is very, very close to Ukrainian, to present time, but very mythological in Ukrainian imagination, is the period of the 90s, the first decade after independence of Ukraine. It was very unusual period, even for countries in such a flexible, in such flux as Ukraine, and very mythological. So we've been doing programming about 20s of 20th century and about 90s, which is quite recent. And our third direction, what we try to do, we try to interpret the condition of the society through contemporary art, literature, and sometimes theater. So this is how we build our program, and this is the type of institution we are.
Oh, thank you. And could you tell us more about the events that you're organizing, and specifically the book forum? What is it? I'm not sure if our audience is familiar with it, and what is happening with it right now.
So in practical terms, what we do in practical terms, right? We do exhibitions, and those are exhibitions of museum significance or contemporary art, or something we call narrative exhibitions, and they can combine anything. They are based in narrative, certain narrative. One of the most recent examples is an exhibition about the history of Crimea as a peninsula. And I don't know if you remember from this short video, there was a statue of a female figure. It's a part of installation by Maria Kulikovska, a Ukrainian artist who is originally from Crimea, and she commented on Crimea and her memories about the place where she is from. So this is the narrative type of exhibitions, or contemporary art, or more museum exhibitions like we have right now, but we were not able to open up to the public yet due to lockdown. Another thing that we do, we also do festivals. We do 2 festivals annual. One is called Book Arsenal, and it's probably it's definitely the largest in Ukraine, and probably one of the largest in Eastern Europe. We received an excellence award from London Book Fair last year as the world's best literature festival, which I understand limitations of the nomination. However, it was very pleasant. And we also do an educational festival for children and teenagers annually. It's called, in Ukrainian, it's called Mystets'kyi Arsenal. This word neo is important. In English, it's we lose the interplay a little bit, but it sounds more or less like non-education arsenal. Because why? Because we consulted with teenagers who are usual participants of our programs, how what should be the title of an educational festival for teenagers? And their answer was definitely non-education. Nothing about education. And they came up with this idea, so we adopted the idea. Because, you know, it hints that it's in fact education. This is what we do. 2 annual festivals and exhibitions. We also do in between. We also do concerts, poetry readings, theater performances of different types.
Okay, and how does the current coronavirus pandemic affect everything you do?
Dramatically. We are not able to operate publicly as many institutions around the world. We could not have the book arsenal this year, which is a huge loss for both public and publishers and writers as well, and authors, because it's probably the most beloved cultural event in Ukraine. Last year we had around 56,000 visitors, 4.5 days, up to 5 days, which is quite a lot of people. And it's usually held in May, at the end of May. So this May we couldn't have the book arsenal, and it's a loss for the cultural map of the country as a whole. But it's understandable. You cannot do such things this year, and we have not been operating as a public institution, the public place, a place of gatherings, since March. So we are still closed. We were hoping to open up actually yesterday, but Kyiv city did not allow its cultural institutions to open up because the situation is still not good enough. So we are closed to for our audiences, which means 2 things. First, our visitors cannot use this institution as they used to. Why do I say use? Because suddenly during the lockdown, it became very, very obvious why people come to cultural institutions. It's not only to interact with art or culture. It's first of all to be together with one another. People go to institution to be together. They usually go with someone. People do, only connoisseurs and very devoted people go just by themselves. Our sociological data shows that most people come either in couples or in smaller groups.
I was going to interrupt and just suggest that maybe they also go to escape whoever they've left at home. It's just, you know what I mean? To escape their husband or wife or children.
Could be, but that's why online culture is not an escape. You just do the same thing. You spend your working day with your computer, and I'm not sure that you are capable of having any more, screen experience by the end of the day. So in any case, we cannot function as this place for people to be together because of the lockdown. This one.
Okay.
Another aspect that, of course, we were hit economically profoundly, because since we cannot open our door, we cannot make any, we have no income.
I understand. Does the government try to compensate the money loss somehow, or is there any support from the state overall?
Not at the moment. It's a very exotic idea to Ukrainian government. that support of culture is rather exotic still. What Ukrainian government did at the beginning of pandemic, they cut cultural budgets dramatically to spend the money on other needs, which is understandable. You need to finance hospitals and doctors and things like that. However, there was no plan B for culture almost at all. So a number of institutions joined their forces to advocate with the government that this is not possible, and that killing one segment of society doesn't help, to save another segment of society, and you have to balance somehow. So the financial cuts were not as dramatic as they were initially designed, but they were quite dramatic. And up to now, there are no programs of replacement of those losses.
And do you think these cuts were justified, or what would this government have to do ideally? Well,
since I'm not the Minister of Finance, I cannot tell you whether it was really justified. I'm quite sure that there were needs. I'm quite sure that you need to spend more money on healthcare in situations as today's, obviously. But what I also think that you have to be much more subtle when you redirect certain funds, and you have to understand the results of decisions. But culture is traditionally seen as a celebrative element, which it's an element of good times. You can have culture when everything else is not endangered. And that's the traditional understanding of culture in the government in Ukraine. And this is precisely what we were protesting to. Because cultural sector is a sector where you have many people, working in this sector, and it's thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And if you just cut their salary, cut spending, you also undercut their financial situation and their family situation, which was not thought about, paradoxically. Mm. This is something we were trying to advocate.
And in your interview for Ua Cultura, you were actually, it's an older interview, but you were commenting on the budgetary law, and you said that Mystets'kyi Arsenal, as a government-run organization, is limited by this government budgetary law a lot, and some of these limitations seem to the foreign partners to be something absurd and comic. I believe you even compared them to the books of Franz Kafka. So can you give our audience a few examples of those?
Okay, let me think about some. Well, for example, if you need to prepay any services or goods, you have to give the list of prepaid services to your governing body in advance. So you have to plan everything very carefully and inform the government that you have to contract someone who needs to be prepaid for something. Which means basically that, I don't know if it sounds clear, this might sound very confusing. Basically that means that you cannot really spend budget money on anything which needs to be prepaid. It's too complicated. The situation is complicated. For example, you cannot invite, well, very simple example, you cannot invite anyone and pay for their travel, per diems, and hotel, because it's prohibited. You only can, as an institution, you can only pay for the travel of someone who is your full-time employee.
Okay.
Period. So we cannot invite authors and artists, for example, and pay for their travel. It's prohibited. Or we cannot receive any support from the city of Kyiv because it's prohibited to finance the same organization from state and local budget. You are either financed from local budget, which is city of Kyiv, or you are financed from the governmental budget. Period. It's the only thing. You cannot sell a book if any public money was used to produce it. If there was any public money involved, it has to be given away for free, only to those who qualify to get a book. So you need to get a letter that someone needs to get your book.
May I just ask along those lines, what about admissions? Is there an admissions fee to the Arsenal or to exhibits? And do you keep that money or?
Yes, there are admission fees, and we're actually prohibited from not getting admission fees. But anything which, the moment we have any profit, we have to give 90% of our profit back to the government. And this December, there was probably the most dramatic situation, because before December, there was the norm that we have to pay back 75% of our income to the, not income, profit to the government. But in December, there was a decision made that we have to pay 90% retrospectively through the previous year. So we had to get money from somewhere to pay the difference. As a result, it results in a situation when organizations are not motivated to generate any income in the end.
Yeah.
So there is this culture which we inherited from Soviet Union, culture of seeing any mistake as a crime potentially. So if any regulation has been violated through your activity as an organization, and that happens because some situations do not fit any legislation, and there could be some either mistakes or some actions which are not covered by existing legislation, but just because situations are very new. All of that is seen as potentially criminal offense, which leads to the situation where institutions, it's not only cultural institutions, but including cultural institutions, are extremely conservative, because it's very dangerous to make any move out of paying salaries. So what directors do, they basically pay salaries, minimal wages, and wages are also regulated by the state. So you get, as a director, imagine you are a director of a museum in a small city, you get instruction how much you should pay your employees, so-called wages tariffs, and you only act according to that, and that's much lower than the market salary level. So you only pay those super minimal wages, and this is the only safe spending you can make. Anything which is on top of that can involve potentially a mistake, and a mistake is perceived as a crime. That's why institutions are all institutions like hospitals and schools and museums, any public institutions are extremely conservative because of that.
I understand. Actually, I was reading an interview this morning of Ivan Kozlenko, and he was he's the director of the Dovzhenko Center, and he was saying very similar things, that oftentimes this even little mistakes are perceived as crime. And also he mentioned there that there was an initiative of a special type of culture institution that Mystets'kyi Arsenal was involved in. And as far as I understand, it's a project of changing the functioning and financing of state non-commercial institutions that Mystets'kyi Arsenal and Dovzhenko Center was supposed to be the prototypes of. Could you tell me if my understanding is correct? Maybe you could speak more about this.
Okay, well, to understand that, you need to understand that there are basically two types of legislative forms for institutions in the Ukrainian cultural field as well. And one is so-called public institution, you can translate it. And those are institutions that they are not expected to generate any profit. They do have some income, but not profit. And they are subsidized by the public money. And another type is so-called state enterprise. And state enterprise is less regulated than the first one, than the budget institutions. They have more freedom, but an Arsenal and Dovzhenko Center are exactly the state enterprises. We are regulated as if we are just an enterprise, a business set up to generate income for the government, which is not our mission. Our mission is not simply generating income. We create something else. So that's why we have to pay 90% of our profit back to the government. And that makes, it brings a lot of problems, but within the medical reform, which was introduced in Ukraine a couple of years ago, started in Ukraine, not introduced yet, a couple of years ago, Ukrainian hospitals were becoming something which is called non-commercial enterprise, meaning that they can generate their income and they can invest this income in their own activity. And this is what we want for cultural institutions as well, to be able to invest back in our institutions. That's why both Ivan Kozlenko and me, we've been advocating this this idea to successive ministers of culture. We will do it again.
Okay, and at this very moment, I think, speaking of culture, Ivan Kozlenko, Dovzhenko Center are a very hot topic due to the scandal. Could you tell us more about what happened and what is your view of the situation with the Dovzhenko Center?
Dovzhenko Center, as I told you, is a state enterprise, but also a very, very valuable cinematographic institution. They are basically an archive of Ukrainian, a repository of Ukrainian film through 20th century. They preserve a lot of great films from the beginning, from early Soviet Union, for example. They interpret it. They do a lot of programming around it, and they are a very respected institution. But they get very little financing, and they are supposed, I even don't know how much that is in British pounds. It's about 5 million hryvnias. I don't know how to convert it. It's less than 1 million pounds, much less. However, the grass they have to generate by themselves, just to make that money. But due to lockdown, they obviously are not able to generate any income at all. Also, since they are, unlike Art Arsenal is subdue. Our governing body is the office of the president, and their governing body is the Ministry of Culture. But the Ministry of Culture has gone through a series of transformation in the past year. It was dismantled, and then it was recreated. Then the government was dismantled along with the minister in charge of recreation. As a result, a lot of bureaucratic work has not been done, many papers has not been signed. And because of that, financing was frozen. So they have not been getting salaries for, I think, up to 4 months, still not getting because of that. And also their immediate governing unit, for some reason, even proposed even deeper budget cuts. No one knows why, without much of justification for some reason. And advocated this idea before the Ministry of Finance. I'm afraid our audiences are lost in those details. I'm sorry about that. In any case, what happened? They ended up, Dovzhenko Center ended up without any funds, neither for the activity, which is not actually even on the table now, nor to support its employees. And that was the situation that sparkled the whole discussion.
And
may I jump in and just ask, I'm going to take it back to the Arsenal, and what I wanted to ask is, considering that the budget that you get and the money is so tightly monitored, how do you acquire a collection? Do you have money to acquire a collection? And also moving it away from the finance, since I'm an art historian, interested in how you decide what it is that you're going to be acquiring. Like, how do you plan your acquisitions?
We can only acquire from our own money. That's why it's so important for us to be able to generate our own income. So if we do make some money, we can acquire some artworks, which we have been doing all the time during the past 3 years. We'll see how it goes this year. This year is unusual, as you understand. How we decide what we acquire? There are two principles. One important principle for us is that we try to acquire some artworks which we exhibit in our exhibitions. That's why we are careful about what we exhibit. We try to, our curators, keep in mind that it's important to us to have important artworks to be able to negotiate it with the artists or the galleries that we would like to acquire some artworks. Why from the exhibitions? But because it helps us to keep a certain level of exhibitions, but also it helps us to document, not only collect, but also to document the program ideas, so to say. So that's one thing. Another thing, we're trying also to collect either from those artists that were very active in the 90s, but because what happened in the 90s in Ukraine, nobody was collecting regularly, systematically, and institutions were not collecting. Because the situation was very bizarre, no one had money, there were no acting institutions in certain fields. So a huge massive of Ukrainian contemporary art is not accessible to public because it's not in public collections. And many of the artworks are not in Ukraine as well. Many of the important artworks were acquired through Moscow, because Moscow at that time in the 90s was a financial center. That's where people could sell their artworks.
Would this be like Chichkan, Savadov, that group?
Yes, So that's Savadov, Olesya, very importantly. Also, during that time, there was very little attention towards authorship and the author's rights. So in the end, collectioners would buy artworks as physical objects without, for cash, without a contract. Today, if you want to have certain artwork for a loan, it's again very complicated from the legislative point of view sometimes. You're not sure whether it's possible to publish something in the catalog, for example. That's why the 90s is important point for us as well. And we usually, we have a small council within Art Arsenal who decides on what we purchase. And this is how we try to acquire artworks. And last year we acquired Viktor Marushchenko, Andrii Sagaidakovsky, Vlada Rauko, and actually Maria Kulikovska gave her installation as a gift to Art Arsenal, and we preserve it as such. We do not acquire much. It's a small amount of artworks that we can acquire in such a way. We also acquired Kirill Protsenko and Alektina Kakhidze, for example, but it's very selected group of artists. Also, since we are not a very rich institution, we cannot really pay huge amounts of money to artists. We are trying to be fair, but we cannot be, we cannot compete with larger private collectors.
Okay, I understand. I think we're running out of time, but before we switch to taking questions from audience, I wanted to ask you just maybe one very quick question. How do you see the role of Mystets'kyi Arsenal on the broader culture politics scene in Ukraine?
Well, Mystets'kyi Arsenal, just like mentioned, Dovzhenko Center, is changing the field of policies through action. We make steps, we advocate for changes, and that's how we like to see ourselves, as those who create ways also for others.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you. I think we'll be now switching to the questions from the audience.
So I invite questions from our viewers and from the audience, and I'm awaiting them, but I do not see any questions yet. So while the questions come in, I will ask another question, if I may. So I am very interested in the planning of your exhibitions. How far in advance do you plan your exhibitions, and do you exchange exhibitions with other museums or international institutions?
We're trying to plan as far as we can, but it's not very far. It's more or less 2.5 years ahead. So at the moment, but this year, of course, we have a longer planning, because at least 2 of the exhibitions that we planned for this year, we cannot do this year. We have to do them in the next periods. So we'll see. When exactly we do them. And also what we did, this is not exactly answering your question, but let me add this. What we also try to do this year is to try do things differently. For example, we try to experiment with the online milieu as if it's a gallery. So one of the exhibitions that we are planning and working on for this fall, it was about the history of Ukrainian architecture. At the moment, we're trying to create an online exhibition, which is very different from what we we are used to. And that's why it's still this year. But again, it's more or less 2 years and a half in advance. And unfortunately, we're not able to exchange exhibitions as such, partly because Arsenal is huge. And every exhibition in Art Arsenal is around 4,000 square meters. And it's they are quite large as you know, one piece.
There is the Tate Modern.
Yes, but we are still humble. What we do, we loan works from our collection. We show a lot of museum objects and artworks from other Ukrainian museums. We try to show artworks from international museums, but since it's often the question of funds, it's rather contemporary art, especially digital art, which is easy to transport on longer distances than classic art.
Okay, we have a number of questions. So the first question is from Olesya Rudenko, who's thanks, I'll just read this. Thank you for the conversation. It was extremely interesting. I have two questions. Why is it so common to appoint first Ukrainian ladies to the council within the Arsenal? So first ladies of Ukraine. And do you think this has any symbolism or just acknowledgement of Arsenal's role in Ukrainian life? The second one will follow. So he's only giving us one now.
Okay. Well, it's there are two precedents of that. The first time there was Marina Poroshenko in the Arsenal's council, and now it's Olena Zelenska. That's connected to the fact that Arsenal is a part of President's office. We are not. It's not the Ministry of Culture who's our governing body. It's the President's office. And that's why there is, of course, a lot of exchange with the President's office because of the bureaucratic even reason. And First Lady is obviously an advocate. So it's very useful to have better advocates.
Hopefully soon you will have a first man on the council.
And that would be nice.
President. Well, okay, so the second question is from Bill Brown. And the question is, how do you attempt to change the difficult government policies and laws and budgeting? Do you lobby lawmakers?
All the time, all the time. We talk to everyone. We write, both me and my colleagues from other institutions. We write articles. We try to convince both MPs and ministers how things should be changed. And I have a feeling that situation has improved quite profoundly during the past, 10 years. Things that were unimaginable 10 years are very common today. For example, even 5 years, such a thing as a Ukrainian Cultural Foundation, which is one of the most successful cultural institutions in Ukraine in terms of policies. It was unimaginable, but they operate very successfully now, and it's a result of advocating from the part of a professional community.
Okay, you have tons of questions, and I'd like to apologize in advance that we might not be able to get to all of these questions. But the next question is from Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta, and Olena asks, what form of interaction do you have with educational institutions in Ukraine, in particularly the Art Academy?
Not much with the Art Academy, I have to say. Some Art Academy students work with our collection especially on restoration. Those are the schools, secondary schools, that are our focus of attention more, because we work with children and teenagers. So we try to work with, we invite schools, we educate teachers. For example, we have a very, very successful series of projects on Ukrainian literature for teachers, with really the best lectures you can find in Ukraine. I'm quite sure none of Ukrainian universities has such good programs, honestly, just because those professors, they work in different universities, but for a short museum project, you can gather them together. So we try to work with teachers, to educate teachers, and we try to work with schools and school groups. We do not work that much with the Art Academy, as I told you, apart from the conservation students.
Okay, you have a question from Lydia Dul, and Lydia asks, how much interaction do you have with international institutions?
I don't know how to measure, how to tell you the quantitative, to give you figures. Well, we do have some professional exchange, but not enough. And this is one of the goals for the next few years. At least this was the goal set for us formally before the lockdown and pandemics, to interact with international institutions. But there is one project which is very successful in Arsenal, and that is Book Arsenal. Book Arsenal is quite international, and we work a lot with partners such as Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the most important book event in the world, with the festivals in Edinburgh, in Rotterdam, and we have a lot of exchange with them both. They do their programs in Book Arsenal, and we do our programs outside as well. And this May, we also created an online program for international publishers about Ukrainian book market and Ukrainian literature. Why Ukrainian literature could be interesting to international publishers as well. It's quite a successful program. If you are interested, it's all on our Facebook page. I mean, all the videos of it.
Okay, Vlasta Shevchenko says, thank you for your very important work at the Arsenal. I have been lucky to see several superb exhibitions. Oh, it's just there, and wish you the best of luck in challenging times, not a question. So another question from Lydia. She asks, you said you advocate for change. What changes would you say you have facilitated so far?
Well, I think not just me, myself, and not just Art Arsenal as an institution, but a broader coalition of experts and institutions, we were quite successful in, for example, advocating Ukrainian Cultural Foundation as a initiative, because there was a lot of conversation about that. A small example, much smaller example I'll give you, for example, was that me as well as colleagues will be participating in a series of consultation with Parliament during the past month to draft a law connected to pandemics and on compensation measures for culture. And this law is supposed to be, I hope, it will be passed through the Parliament this month.
Okay. We have a question from Eva Sulik, who is writing a PhD on contemporary Ukrainian art, and she has been and will be in Cambridge a number of times. So her question, or her statement in question, is, hello, thank you for this conversation. I am curious, so it's a two-part question, if the government has anything to say about the exhibition program, if the government impacts the exhibition program. And her second question is about space. how important is the space in creating your program? Does it determine your exhibition program? And is the history of the building somehow important in thinking about what you exhibit in it?
Well, first of all, the first answer is no.
The government does not have.
No, I mean, we do not get any directions or instructions. Okay. What can and what cannot be exhibited in Art Arsenal. Thanks God. Second, yes, we do work with the space a lot in terms of space, not history. But let me answer that a little bit later. Well, we do put a lot of efforts into working with architects, and we're quite happy actually to have developed a trend of inviting architects to work on exhibitions. So many institutions, and Art Arsenal is one of the leaders in that, do not put up exhibitions without architects any longer, which is a change compared to a few years ago. So we do really work with the space in terms of space. But we also work on the historical aspect of our building, and this project is planned for 2022-2023, because what we actually should be doing more is interpreting our building, and lockdown has been has shown us clearly that all our activity is centered around this building. This building is absolutely essential for what type of institution we are, both for Book Arsenal and for exhibitions as well. So our museum department is working on research on the history of the building and area. For example, there is evidence which we are still, our colleagues are still researching and checking, that there was a concentration camp for Jewish teenagers during World War II in our building.
Wow.
So that's a huge drama and issue in it. But we are thinking not about an exhibition, but an online project in this particular case.
I just wanted to bring everyone's attention that it is now 6:01, and you have more questions. So maybe we can share these questions with you after this discussion, if you'd like to get back to some of the people who've written in. But I will ask this last question because I think it's directly related to what you were just saying. And it's another point or question from Oleksiy Rudenko. He writes 2 points, but I'll just read the brief one at the end. And it says, he says, to formulate briefly, would Arsenal be interested in organizing theatrical historical tours about the history of the Pevny district and the Kyiv fortress next year with a group of alumni from the Shevchenko University?
Well, I have to consult with my colleagues on that. Well, theoretically, yes. But since there is a lot of practical details involved, I would have to talk to my colleagues about it.
Okay. Oh, no, there's, I'm going to read one more question. Olenka Dmitriuk, who is the librarian for Slavonic Studies here at the University of Cambridge. And she writes, thank you for an interesting presentation. Seeing that recently there was a discussion on Facebook regarding the homophobia of some Ukrainian Cultural Fund experts, with not much public reaction by the fund, and the recent protests around the world raising awareness about racism, misogyny, and other intersectional issues, how does the Art Arsenal make sure that the canon of art it creates is truly inclusive? And what policies do you envision going into the future to set an example for other institutions?
That's a great and very complicated question, I have to tell you. Well, we are trying to be very sensitive towards that. And we are especially sensitive towards any signs of censorship. And this is one of the principles, not policies, but principles that we keep, that we are always with the, as an institution, we're always with the artist. Not all the artists, you know, well, whatever happens, we should be, as an institution, on the side of the artists. That's why censorship should not be possible. And there is an act of censorship in the history of Art Arsenal. That's why it's a question of double sensitivity for us. What we also do, we are very, well, all the program decisions are very inclusive in Arsenal, and they are all based on a discussion within the team. So it makes sure that there is no single center of, even myself, you know, as a director, I cannot just give direct orders what to do, what not to do with the programming, and that helps to avoid situations which are I don't know, toxic or dangerous. What we also try to, well, a small example, let me give you. I'm not sure whether it responds to what you asked, but the small example is that we are trying to use in our language something which is called in Ukrainian feminitive, and that is a gender sensitive language when women are referred to as women. Well, directorka, not director.
Directorka still sounds normal, but Andrii has been introducing me to some of these, and they sound so strange to me.
Like Mystets'kyi and now.
No, Mystets'kyi is normal. There was another one that I...
Politikyinya.
Yeah, Politikyinya to me sounds very silly.
Well, you get used to it. You get used to it. My teenage daughter, who's going to be 15 soon, she told me recently that you can make a feminative of virtually every word. So if you don't do it, you just don't want to do it.
I agree with you.
We are trying, going back to, we're trying to use feminative in our official language, official. That's a small example.
I'm afraid that we are out of time, but I wanted to thank you, sincerely thank you for such an interesting conversation. And I feel like there are so many questions, and I myself can think of tons of questions that I would like to ask you about the running of the Arsenal. So I definitely feel we should continue this conversation again and maybe have a second part of this conversation or something of along those lines. And I'd like to reiterate, and I think Andrii probably has mentioned this to you, but we have quite a number of students who are very much interested both in art and in experience in Ukraine and in working on their Ukrainian. And so I hope and look forward to a productive and fruitful, I don't know, collaboration together, if that is in the interest of Arsenal.
Very much. Me too. Thank you so much. It's an honor for me to speak to you, and it's also for me. It's important to be able to speak about Arsenal to someone who is not to whom I can try to explain the depth of situations. So thank you very much for giving me this chance.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to me as a person who does not directly work with culture but language. I wish just we had more time for more questions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Olesya, next time a 2 hour.
Hope to see you in Kyiv one day.
That would be wonderful. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us and for the great questions. And please stay tuned for our next conversation and future conversations. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.